You wake up one morning and your entire city has simply vanished. Sounds like science fiction, right? But on September 11, 2023, this became reality for over 100,000 people in Libya. Derna, a thriving, historic city, was literally erased from the map in less than 3 hours. And here's what'll shock you: it wasn't bombs, war, or earthquakes. It was water. Yes, plain water transformed into the most destructive force the Mediterranean has ever witnessed. But before you think that's third world stuff, couldn't happen here, let me tell you something that'll make you rethink where you live. Los Angeles, Miami, Rio de Janeiro, all face the exact same geographical risks Derna faced. The difference? They haven't been tested by nature's full fury yet. The question isn't if this can happen to you, but when, and whether you'll be ready when it's your turn to dance with the forces that shaped our planet. Imagine a city that resisted empires, survived wars, and witnessed centuries of history. This was Derna, one of the most fascinating geographical curiosities of North Africa. Located on the Mediterranean coast of Libya, this city of approximately 100,000 inhabitants carried with it a cultural heritage that few truly knew. Its narrow streets told stories of Ottoman merchants, its mosques echoed prayers of generations, and its strategic position transformed it into a true treasure of Libyan geography. The city rose majestically between mountains and sea, creating a landscape that blended the blue of the Mediterranean with the gold of the desert, offering its inhabitants a quality of life that many considered privileged. Derna wasn't just another dot on the map, it represented the beating heart of a region that connected Africa, Europe, and the Middle East. Derna's geography revealed curiosities that few specialists could completely decipher, especially when it came to its location in relation to wadis, dry valleys that transformed into rivers during rains. These wadis, known locally as Wadi Derna and Wadi al-Kuf, cut through the city like veins, creating a natural drainage system that had functioned for thousands of years. During the Ottoman era, engineers built bridges and canals that took advantage of this unique geography, transforming what could be a problem into an advantage. The locals knew that these seasonal rivers were both blessing and curse. They brought fertility to the arid lands, but also represented a constant challenge for urban engineering. This geographical duality created one of the most intriguing curiosities of the region: how a city could prosper precisely where nature showed its most unpredictable face. For decades, Derna prospered precisely because of this complex geography, developing a unique culture that respected both the gifts and dangers of nature. The older residents used to say that, "the city dances with the wadis," an expression that reflected the delicate harmony between urban development and natural forces. Its traditional constructions, made of local limestone, were designed to resist occasional floods, while gardens and orchards took advantage of seasonal water to flourish. Well, here was one of the most impressive geographical curiosities: a city that didn't fight against geography, but rather danced with it. However, this millennial dance was about to transform into a tragedy of epic proportions, when forces much greater than traditional wisdom would enter the scene. The phenomenon of dams represents one of humanity's most ambitious attempts to control nature's raw power, and in Libya's case, these engineering marvels became essential lifelines in an arid landscape. Built during the 1970s as part of ambitious development projects, the dams above Derna weren't just concrete structures, they were symbols of progress, designed to harness the unpredictable waters of the wadis and transform them into controlled resources. These massive barriers, standing like silent guardians over the valley, held back millions of cubic meters of water, creating artificial lakes that reflected the Libyan sun like mirrors. The engineering curiosities behind these structures fascinated experts worldwide. How do you build something strong enough to contain nature's fury while remaining economically viable? Well, it's one of those geographical curiosities that shows how human ambition often dances on the edge of natural forces. The strategic importance of these dams extended far beyond simple water management. They represented a complete transformation of the region's geography and economy. Local farmers could finally plan their crops with confidence, knowing that water would flow consistently through irrigation channels that snaked across the previously barren landscape. Industries began to flourish as reliable water sources attracted investment, while the controlled flow helped prevent the seasonal flooding that had plagued the region for centuries. But here's where things get interesting, and this is one of those curiosities that few people truly understand: these dams also created a false sense of security. The community below began to develop as if the natural flood cycles had been permanently tamed, building homes and businesses in areas that had been naturally flood-prone for millennia. You see, when we try to outsmart geography, we sometimes forget that nature always has the final word. The maintenance and monitoring of these dams required constant vigilance, yet the political instability that plagued Libya after 2011 created gaps in this critical oversight. International experts had warned that aging infrastructure in conflict zones represents one of the most dangerous combinations in modern engineering. It's like playing Russian roulette with thousands of lives. The dams that once symbolized progress and control over nature's forces gradually became ticking time bombs, their concrete showing signs of wear while their monitoring systems fell into disrepair. This geographical reality created a perfect storm scenario: critical infrastructure in decline, a population that had grown accustomed to safety, and natural forces that never stopped testing the limits of human engineering. As residents went about their daily lives, few realized that their city's fate hung in the balance between aging concrete and the relentless power of water seeking its natural path. Storm Daniel wasn't just another weather event, it was a geographical phenomenon that would rewrite the history books and become one of the most devastating curiosities of Mediterranean meteorology. This extraordinary storm system, which began forming over the warm waters of the Mediterranean in early September 2023, carried with it the kind of raw power that ancient civilizations once attributed to angry gods. The storm's unique trajectory and intensity created what meteorologists call a metacane, a Mediterranean hurricane that combines the worst elements of tropical cyclones with the unpredictable nature of European weather systems. What made Daniel particularly dangerous was its slow-moving nature, allowing it to dump unprecedented amounts of rainfall over concentrated areas for extended periods. The geographical curiosities of this storm fascinated scientists worldwide. How could a relatively small sea produce such a devastating weather monster? The storm's path across the Mediterranean revealed one of nature's most terrifying capabilities: the ability to transform peaceful waters into weapons of mass destruction. As Daniel approached the Libyan coast, it carried with it moisture equivalent to several months of normal rainfall, compressed into just a few days of relentless precipitation. The storm's eye wall, though smaller than typical Atlantic hurricanes, packed winds exceeding 100 miles per hour and dropped rainfall rates that exceeded 400 millimeters in less than 24 hours, numbers that represent some of the most extreme weather curiosities ever recorded in the region. Local meteorologists, working with limited resources due to the country's ongoing political challenges, struggled to communicate the unprecedented nature of what was approaching. The geography of the North African coast, with its mountainous terrain rising sharply from the sea, created a perfect funnel effect that would concentrate the storm's fury into the valleys below. What made Storm Daniel particularly insidious was how it exploited the very geographical features that had made Derna prosperous for centuries. The same wadis that had brought life-giving water to the region now became channels for an unstoppable torrent of destruction. The storm's slow movement meant that instead of passing quickly and allowing the land to absorb the rainfall gradually, it created a sustained deluge that overwhelmed every natural and artificial drainage system. International Weather Services later described it as a once-in-a-thousand-years event, one of those geographical curiosities that reminds us how little we truly understand about our planet's capacity for extreme weather. As the storm intensified and moved inland, it was about to test not just the engineering of human-made structures, but the very limits of what a landscape could endure before surrendering to forces far greater than anything recorded in local memory. The collapse of the dams above Derna represents one of the most catastrophic engineering failures in modern history, transforming what should have been protective infrastructure into instruments of unimaginable destruction. At approximately 2:30 a.m. on September 11, 2023, the first dam, already weakened by decades of inadequate maintenance and overwhelmed by Storm Daniel's relentless assault, gave way with a sound that witnesses described as, like the earth itself was screaming. The failure created a domino effect that geographers and engineers are still studying as one of the most tragic curiosities of hydraulic engineering: how 30 million cubic meters of water, released in mere minutes, could reshape an entire landscape. The second dam, located downstream, held for barely 90 minutes before the combined force of the released water and continued rainfall caused it to collapse as well. This sequential failure created what experts call a compound flood event, a geographical phenomenon where multiple water sources converge to create destruction far beyond what any single source could achieve. The physics of the dam collapse revealed terrifying curiosities about the power of water when it suddenly released from containment. The initial breach created a wall of water estimated to be 7 meters high, traveling at speeds exceeding 40 kilometers per hour through the narrow valley that led directly to Derna's heart. This wasn't just flooding, it was a liquid avalanche carrying with it tons of debris, boulders, vehicles, and entire buildings that had been swept up in its path. The geography of the Wadi system, which had been Derna's blessing for millennia, now became a perfect channel for destruction, concentrating and accelerating the water's force rather than dispersing it. International hydraulic engineers later calculated that the energy released was equivalent to several nuclear bombs, a sobering reminder of how much power we casually contain behind concrete walls. The speed of the collapse meant that early warning systems, already compromised by the country's infrastructure challenges, had virtually no time to alert the sleeping population below. What made this disaster particularly devastating was how the geographical curiosities of the terrain amplified the destruction at every turn. The narrow valley walls acted like a funnel, increasing the water's velocity and height as it approached the city center. The flood carried with it not just water, but a deadly cocktail of mud, debris, and structural materials that turned the torrent into a concrete mixer of destruction. Buildings that had stood for centuries were reduced to rubble in seconds, while modern structures designed to withstand earthquakes crumbled like sandcastles before the unstoppable force. The flood's path through the city followed the ancient drainage patterns that urban planners had built over, revealing how geography always remembers its original design, even when humans try to rewrite it. As the sun rose on September 11th, the world would witness one of the most complete urban destructions in recorded history, with entire neighborhoods simply erased from existence, leaving behind only the eternal question: how do you rebuild a city when the very ground beneath it has been fundamentally altered by forces beyond human control? The numbers that emerged from Derna's devastation painted a picture so catastrophic that international disaster experts initially refused to believe the reports, thinking they were exaggerated by the chaos of the moment. Over 11,000 people lost their lives in a matter of hours, while more than 10,000 others simply vanished without a trace, their bodies swept out to sea or buried beneath tons of debris and mud. Entire neighborhoods that had housed thousands of families were completely erased from the map, leaving behind only empty spaces where life had flourished just hours before. The geographical curiosities of this disaster became evident when satellite imagery revealed that approximately 1,500 buildings had been completely destroyed, while another 2,000 suffered severe damage, numbers that represent roughly 30% of the city's total infrastructure. These weren't just statistics on a page, they represented centuries of human history, culture, and dreams that had been washed away in less time than it takes to watch a movie. The scale of displacement created one of the most challenging humanitarian crises in recent Mediterranean history, with over 43,000 people suddenly finding themselves homeless in a country already struggling with political instability. The curiosities of human resilience became apparent as survivors, many of whom had lost everything including family members, began organizing rescue efforts even before international aid could arrive. Local hospitals, those that survived the flood, reported treating over 3,000 injured people in the first 48 hours alone, working without electricity, clean water, or adequate medical supplies. The economic impact revealed another layer of geographical tragedy. Derna's port, which had been the economic lifeline for the entire region, was completely destroyed, along with the coastal road that connected the city to the rest of Libya. International economists estimated the total damage at over $1.9 billion, a staggering figure for a city of 100,000 people, representing approximately $19,000 in damage per resident. The environmental aftermath created curiosities that environmental scientists are still studying, as the flood didn't just destroy human infrastructure but fundamentally altered the region's entire ecosystem. The massive amount of debris and sediment deposited by the flood changed the coastline permanently, creating new geological formations while destroying others that had existed for millennia. The Mediterranean Sea, for weeks after the disaster, carried visible traces of the destruction, pieces of homes, furniture, and vehicles floating hundreds of kilometers from their original locations. International maritime authorities had to issue navigation warnings as the sea became a floating graveyard of civilization's remnants. The psychological impact on survivors created another dimension of this geographical tragedy. How do you rebuild not just infrastructure, but an entire community's sense of safety and belonging when the very landscape that defined their identity has been permanently altered? These numbers weren't just statistics, they represented the complete transformation of a place and its people, creating questions about resilience, reconstruction, and the relationship between human settlements and natural forces that experts around the world are still trying to answer. The tragedy of Derna revealed fundamental truths about geography that modern urban planning often ignores, creating lessons that extend far beyond the borders of Libya to every coastal city in the world. The disaster demonstrated how ancient geographical wisdom, the knowledge that led early settlers to build temporary structures in flood-prone areas and permanent ones on higher ground, had been forgotten in the rush toward modernization. International geographers studying the aftermath discovered that traditional Libyan architecture had incorporated flood-resistant features for centuries, with raised foundations, reinforced walls, and strategic building placement that worked in harmony with natural water flow patterns. These curiosities of traditional building techniques represented thousands of years of accumulated wisdom about living safely in challenging geographical environments. The modern city of Derna, however, had been built according to contemporary urban planning principles that prioritized efficiency and economic growth over geographical realities, creating a perfect storm of vulnerability that nature eventually exploited with devastating consequences. The concept of geographical memory became a crucial lesson from this disaster, revealing how landscapes retain information about past events even when human memory fails. Scientists studying the flood patterns discovered that the water followed almost exactly the same paths used by ancient floods, carving channels that matched geological evidence of previous disasters dating back thousands of years. This geographical phenomenon, known as paleoflooding, shows how the Earth itself keeps records of extreme events in its rock formations, sediment layers, and erosion patterns. The curiosities of this natural record-keeping system fascinated researchers. The land had been trying to tell its story for millennia, but human development had obscured the warning signs. Modern cities built in similar geographical settings, from Los Angeles to Mumbai, from Istanbul to Rio de Janeiro, now face urgent questions about whether their urban planning adequately respects the geographical realities of their locations. The lesson is clear: geography doesn't forget, even when humans do. The disaster also revealed critical insights about climate change and its interaction with geographical vulnerabilities, creating a case study that climate scientists worldwide are using to understand future risks. The intensity of Storm Daniel, while unprecedented in recorded history, fits patterns that climate models have been predicting for Mediterranean regions as global temperatures rise. The geographical curiosities of this climate geography interaction are becoming increasingly important as extreme weather events become more frequent and intense. Coastal cities in similar geographical settings are now reassessing their vulnerability to compound disasters, events where multiple natural forces combine to create destruction far beyond what any single force could achieve. The rebuilding of Derna presents an opportunity to demonstrate how modern urban planning can integrate both traditional geographical wisdom and cutting-edge climate science to create resilient communities. But the question remains: will other cities around the world learn from these geographical lessons before nature forces them to learn the hard way, or will they continue to ignore the eternal truths written in the landscape itself? The lessons emerging from Derna's catastrophe extend far beyond engineering and urban planning, revealing fundamental truths about human resilience, community solidarity, and our complex relationship with the natural world. In the immediate aftermath of the disaster, the world witnessed extraordinary acts of heroism as ordinary citizens became rescue workers, doctors, and community leaders, demonstrating that human courage often emerges strongest in geography's darkest moments. Neighboring communities, despite their own challenges, opened their doors to tens of thousands of displaced people, showing how geographical proximity can create bonds stronger than political or economic differences. International aid organizations discovered that the most effective relief efforts were those that worked directly with local knowledge and geographical understanding, rather than imposing external solutions. This disaster taught us that successful disaster response requires a deep appreciation for the geographical curiosities of each unique location. What works in one place may fail catastrophically in another due to subtle differences in terrain, climate, and local conditions. The rebuilding process has become a fascinating case study in how communities can emerge stronger from geographical disasters when they embrace both traditional wisdom and modern innovation. Engineers and architects from around the world have flocked to Libya to study how future construction can better integrate geographical realities with human needs, creating buildings that work with natural forces rather than against them. The curiosities of this reconstruction effort include innovative drainage systems that channel water safely, building materials that can withstand extreme weather, and urban planning that respects the ancient wisdom of flood patterns. Local communities have insisted on participating in every aspect of the rebuilding process, ensuring that new structures reflect both international best practices and traditional geographical knowledge. This collaborative approach has created something unprecedented, a disaster recovery that serves as a model for climate adaptation worldwide, demonstrating how tragedy can become the foundation for transformative change. Perhaps the most profound lesson from this geographical catastrophe is how it has changed global conversations about risk, resilience, and responsibility in an era of climate change. Cities around the world are now conducting Derna assessments, comprehensive evaluations of their own geographical vulnerabilities and the adequacy of their protective infrastructure. The disaster has sparked new international cooperation on early warning systems, with meteorologists and emergency management experts sharing data and strategies to prevent similar tragedies. The curiosities of this global response demonstrate how a local geographical disaster can catalyze worldwide change, creating networks of knowledge and support that transcend national boundaries. Insurance companies, government agencies, and international organizations are now asking harder questions about development in high-risk areas, while communities are demanding more transparency about the geographical realities of their locations. The ultimate lesson may be this: in an interconnected world facing increasing climate volatility, every local disaster becomes a global classroom, teaching us that our relationship with geography isn't just about where we live, it's about how we choose to live with the understanding that the Earth itself is our most important teacher, and ignoring its lessons comes at a price that no society can afford to pay. Now that you've discovered these geographical truths that most people will never learn, the question becomes, what are you going to do with this knowledge? Are you going to be like the majority who read, nod, and forget, or will you be among the few who actually take action? Look around where you live right now. Do you know your area's geological history? Have you ever researched what natural disasters have occurred in your region over the past 100 years? Here's your challenge: this week, investigate the geographical curiosities of your own location. Find out if you live in a flood zone, earthquake area, or hurricane path. Check if the infrastructure protecting you is actually maintained and adequate. Because here's the uncomfortable truth: most people discover their geographical vulnerabilities only when it's too late to do anything about it. The residents of Derna went to sleep feeling safe, just like you probably will tonight. The difference between survival and catastrophe often comes down to preparation and geographical awareness. So ask yourself, are you living with your eyes open to the realities of your landscape, or are you just hoping that nature will continue to be kind? Don't let this knowledge become just another interesting story you once read. Let it become the wake-up call that changes how you think about where and how you live. If this opened your eyes to geographical realities you never considered, please hit that like button. It helps more people discover these crucial truths. Share this with your friends and family because this knowledge could literally save lives. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate notifications so you can continue learning about the hidden forces shaping our world. Your safety might depend on understanding them.